You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to Mission Log Engage here on the Roddenberry Podcast Entertainment channel on YouTube. My name is Norman.
And my name is John, and we're the Mission Log guys, and we're engaging with you because you are engaging with us. Because you send us comments and messages and questions and emails, and the good and the bad, we take it all.
That's right. We created this little short quote unquote format, because we say at the end of every mission log, and remember, I don't even remember what we say. And remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log or Engage.
Yes, and Engage is such a great way to do it because we can just pump out a few of these every week and have a conversation about your comments. And wow, we've got some this week that run the gamut, and some of them, taking us to task as is totally in the spirit of Mission Log.
Sometimes we'll ramp up into the week. Sometimes we will go warp 7, 8 right out of the gate.
In 5, 6,
7, 8.
All right. So our first email this week is from Joshua, and this is actually a Patreon message. So we don't really talk about that on this show because it is short, and you guys, hear a lot about it on the main show. But yes, we do have a very active Patreon page, and that leads you directly into our Discord. There's just so much back and forth and chatter there. So Joshua sent us a message on Patreon, and here goes. Hello again, John and Norman. I just listened to your patrons-only recording of the Extreme Measures episode. For the most part, I agree with your takes on it. This episode, focused as it is on a single plot line, does stick out like a sore thumb against the rest of the final chapter arc. That said, I was bothered by one of Norman's closing arguments, not just because of the nature of that argument, but that it points to how Extreme Measures itself could have been a much more compelling episode of Star Trek than it is. During the closing segment, Norman rightly calls out Section 31 for attempting genocide against the Founders via the changeling virus. But then he questions whether O'Brien and Dr. Bashir are any better, even though their transgressions, kidnapping, non-consensual experimentation, and borderline torture against Sloan, not only don't rise anywhere close to the level of genocide, but are being done in part to try and prevent Section 31's aforementioned act of genocide. Granted, the episode itself does gloss over these higher moral stakes by making clear that O'Brien's and Bashir's primary objective is specifically to save Odo. Still, anyone can put two and two together and realize that if they fail to get the information they need out of Sloan, then not only will Odo die, but so will any hope of stopping Section 31's genocide. What bothers me about Norman's remark is that it suggests Starfleet/the Federation principles either don't or shouldn't contain any sort of lesser than two evils provision. In the previous episode, Ezri Dax told Worf that the Klingon Empire had grown so corrupt and decadent from its internal contradictions that it deserved to die. If Federation principles are really so rigid that their worst possible violation, i.e. genocide, is allowed to happen because the alternative is to endorse relatively piddling violations that might be committed in order to stop it, then Dax could have said the same thing about the Federation, as what I've just described as one hell of an internal contradiction. Had writers Weddle and Thompson, David Weddle and Bradley Thompson, chosen to run with that idea to explicitly raise the stakes beyond just Odo's life and also thwarting a Section 31 genocide, and to force O'Brien and Dr. Bashir to take stock of their own actions along the way, they could have made Extreme Measures a spiritual remake of In the Pale Moonlight. Instead, we got, well, what we got, which was still an okay episode in my opinion, but also missed opportunity to do something much stronger. Cheers, Josh. And Josh is on Twitter as Pax Federatica, and very active there in all of our feedback forums. So thank you very much, Josh. So, Norman, he's calling you out.
Well, thank you, Josh. That was an incredibly articulated email. I love the points that you're bringing up, and I love that we can have this discussion in back and forth in a way here on Engage. I think we have to take this point for point, because I think
Hmm.
in one sense, I don't think that that Josh is saying the critique of the episode is in question. If I understand his email correctly, it's my critique of whether or not there is a quote unquote sliding scale of principle
Hmm.
that can be applied to what Dr. Bashir and Chief O'Brien did. Now, Chief O'Brien, I can probably give a pass to in a way, because Chief O'Brien is, one, not an officer, two, more of the blue collar perspective on Deep Space Nine. Dr. Bashir is a, wait for it, folks, doctor.
Oh, right, right. This is
He
the
is
doctor before his name. Yeah.
he is bound before Starfleet and before God, as he took his oath, to preserve life at all costs and not endanger life if absolutely possible. That is his choice, whether or not he's going to endanger somebody's life. What he did to Sloan, he should be stripped of his doctor's license permanently, because what he did was violate the most sacred oath of a physician: do, period, no, period, harm, period, regardless of whether or not he worked under the pretense of saving Odo, the pretense of trying to stop the Dominion aggression or the virus that was, decimating the
Hmm.
founders and in the Great Link. He chose to specifically go further than anyone ever expected by Frankensteining technology to keep Sloan alive, to seek information. I understand the end result of what he was trying to do, but what he did was in direct violation of his sacred oath as a physician. That, to me, as the son of a doctor, is incomprehensible and unforgivable. So whether or not I hold him to a higher Starfleet standard is one thing, because I do think
Hmm.
that there are shades of gray that obviously Deep Space Nine dabbles in. But where I hold Dr. Bashir is something to a completely higher authority. That higher authority is the promise he made for his patients, for his enemies, and for everybody in between, not to do harm to them. That is completely antithetical. That is the opposite in every possible way of what he promised to do. And he pushed O'Brien to follow him.
Hmm.
So I don't give Bashir a pass on this at all. Not at all.
Interesting. Because of the shortness of our format here, I mean, my mind honestly is going in a lot of different directions on this, and I feel like there is a great ethical debate slash discussion to be had about this, because there are other factors going on here as well. There's the fact that Sloan is dying. I mean, Sloan took his own life to protect that secret. But then, as you so well point out, Bashir comes in experimenting on this body, and is it harmful? Well, it's certainly questionable. There are huge ethical and moral red flags around everything that he's doing. Um, that would be a great conversation for like a panel or a whole show, and get an ethicist and philosopher and a bunch of people to chime in on this. Um, the thing that I'm just thinking here for the sake of brevity, because I don't disagree with you, Josh, about a couple of the points that you make, that this idea of lesser of two evils, well, yes and no, we're still talking about evil, or we're still talking about bad choices, when we should always be looking for what is the correct or moral choice. Is there, are we ever pushed up against the wall so much that we can't find a better moral choice to make? And that's something that Star Trek usually is very good about finding for us. And as far as Esri's complaint, criticism of the Klingon Empire, and if you point that toward the Federation, well, I would say The Federation overall has shown itself to not be corrupt, but I would certainly take Esri's words and apply it to Section 31. And as I said in the episode, Esri, go to Captain Sisko and say, Captain Sisko, if you have any shred of decency or morality here, when you're done with this, you need to figure out a way to burn Section 31 to the ground. Because this is an anchor that weighs down the Federation and robs it of any sort of moral authority that it has or could ever hope to have. So, yeah, I do think that same standard could apply in that respect. But I do want to make just kind of a quick, comment about this. There's this great video that's been going around forever and ever. It's an animated it's like a little animated YouTube video of, Star Trek versus Star Wars. And an Imperial Star Destroyer shows up in front of the Enterprise D, and it's Darth Vader having an argument with Captain Picard, who's better. Star Wars sucks, Star Trek sucks, whatever. And one of the jokes in there is that Vader says to Picard, like, all you do is stand around and talk about things, And that is... that is a point, a bit of criticism that you could level against some episodes of Star Trek where it's a lot of ethical discussion about what are the best steps to take. Then you get to episodes where it's just a lot of shorthand and a lot of plot cramming. And I feel like this is one of those episodes where there were good ethical debates and discussions to have. You needed to actually set those stakes for Bashir, not just physically about what would happen to him if Sloane dies, but for his career, for his sense of ethics. What are the stakes here? Does he risk being stripped of his medical license, being kicked out of Starfleet Medical? Is there a discussion to be had with his commanding officer about his decision to do these things?
Or from his best friend.
His best friend. Yeah,
that
there
should
you
have
go.
come from O'Brien. O'Brien, when he asked him for the multi-phasic induction technology.
Oh, you're good.
I was almost
you even
there.
came up with that.
But he said that, get me this piece of technology so I can keep Sloane alive just long enough for us to get the information, as opposed to, I'm a doctor, I have to save his life. First.
Yeah.
First and foremost, his patient or a patient, potential patient, was dying in front of him.
Yeah.
But all he really cared about was keeping him alive just enough to get the cure, as opposed to keeping him alive, period. So that's my biggest singular issue with Bashir's decisions, but also at what stake at the sliding scale are principles?
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay just to slide it down a little bit in order to benefit the greater good? And then where does that sliding scale stop?
Yeah.
The greater the good, the further down the scale you slide? Is
I tell
what
you
we're
what,
dealing with?
I tell you what, my friend, you hold that thought, and Josh, you hold that thought, and the rest of our listeners, you hold that thought, because we're going to do what we did last week. We're going to come back tomorrow with an email that absolutely ties into this as well, and I can't wait. It's our second two-parter in a week of Mission Log Engaged.
On Section 31.
I feel like there's a lot more to say. But look, there's more to discuss. And if you would like to discuss it with us, make sure you send us your comments at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at missionlogpod. Remember to subscribe to this playlist at youtube.com/roddenberryprod. That would be the Mission Log Engage playlist. And we may engage with your comments on the air.